The snow had come early that year. By late November, the town of Maple Hollow lay buried beneath a thick blanket of white, and Ethan Miller stood at the kitchen window of his century-old farmhouse watching the world go silent. It had been 10 months since Grace passed, 10 months since her laughter last echoed down the hallway, since her favorite mug, green with a chipped rim, had held anything but dust. 10 months of mornings that blurred together in the dim light of grief. He still made 2 cups of coffee every day. He didn't know why. The second one always went untouched, cooling slowly on the other side of the table. The farmhouse creaked as the wind picked up outside. Ethan turned from the window, wrapped his hands around the steaming mug, and sat at the kitchen table. The chair across from him remained empty, as always. Grace had died suddenly, an aneurysm in the middle of the night. One moment she was reading in bed beside him, humming under her breath. The next, her book had slipped from her fingers, and she was gone before the ambulance could even reach the house. Everyone told him time would help, that it would get easier. But the truth was, Ethan didn't want it to get easier. If the pain faded, would she disappear with it? He spent most of his days in silence, save for the occasional phone call from his sister in Colorado, or a well-meaning visit from the pastor at First Presbyterian, but he rarely answered. Words felt too sharp, too heavy. Most days he just walked the halls, dusted her books, touched the old piano keys she used to play. On Sundays he tried to go to church. He sat in the back row, nodded politely at the few, who still approached him and left before the final hymn. He couldn't bear to hear "It is well with my soul" anymore. It wasn't well. Not with his soul, not with anything. Christmas was nearing, and the house still bore remnants of last year's decorations. A cracked snow globe on the mantel, a string of fairy lights hanging half-lit over the window. Grace had loved Christmas. She would hum carols while baking cinnamon rolls, string popcorn for the tree, and light enough candles to make the whole house glow. Ethan hadn't even brought the tree down from the attic this year, but it was Christmas Eve now, and the ache was louder than usual. He stood in the dim glow of the fireplace, a stack of letters in his hand. Dozens of them, all written by Grace over the years. Anniversary notes, sticky reminders of groceries, long letters she'd leave him when she visited her sister out of state. Each one held her handwriting, her humor, her warmth, and now each one burned. He fed them into the fire slowly, one by one, watching the flames devour the curves of her G's and the soft loops of her E's. Part of him wanted to stop. Another part didn't want to feel anything anymore. Then, just as he reached the last envelope, it slipped from his fingers and fluttered to the floor. He bent to pick it up and froze. This one was different. The envelope was older. Its paper, yellowing at the corners, and on the front, in Grace's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "To Ethan, in case I go first." His breath caught. The room held still. He sat down slowly, hands trembling, and opened the envelope. Inside was a single page written in her small, careful script. "Ethan, my love, if you're reading this, I suppose it means life didn't go the way we planned. But then again, when did it ever? Please don't stay frozen, Ethan. I know you. You'll try to live in the past, in the safe cocoon of our memories. But you're not meant to disappear with me. You're still here because you still have something to give, to feel, to become. Let the garden bloom again. Talk to someone. Bake that awful banana bread you always said you'd try. Laugh. Mess up. Try again. Let yourself live. I love you always. But love isn't a chain, it's a door, and it's okay to walk through it. Yours forever." Grace Ethan stared at the letter for a long time. He didn't cry. The tears didn't come, not yet. But he folded the paper with a kind of reverence and tucked it into his chest pocket. The fire still crackled behind him. Outside, the wind slowed and the snow began to fall again, softer this time, like a whisper. Ethan stood and walked to the window. For the first time in months, he imagined something beyond winter. Part 2. Light in the Snow. The next morning, Ethan stood at the back door, staring at the garden. It was buried under snow now, an expanse of white draped over the dormant flower beds Grace had once tended like a sacred ritual. In spring and summer, it had been a riot of color: peonies, black-eyed Susans, lavender, and her favorite, zinnias. She used to hum while pruning, her gloves always too big for her fingers, dirt smudging her cheeks like war paint. Ethan hadn't stepped into that space since the funeral, but something in the letter, those final words, "Let the garden bloom," again, lingered in him like an ember refusing to die out. By noon, he'd found the old shovel in the garage and trudged through the deep snow to clear a narrow path along the edge of the beds. The cold bit through his jacket, but he didn't stop, not even when his fingers ached or the wind howled through the trees. It wasn't much, but it was something. The next day he came back, and the next he didn't have a plan, just motion, habit, something to do with his hands, something that didn't feel like grief. One afternoon, about a week later, a voice startled him. "You planting snowmen out here or something?" Ethan turned to see a boy, maybe 11 or 12, standing at the edge of his property with a sled in one hand and a lopsided grin. "Just clearing the beds," Ethan replied. "You know it's still winter, right?" Ethan gave a dry chuckle. "Yeah, I guess I just needed to remember what was underneath." The boy looked at the half-cleared patch of garden, then back at him. "I'm Lucas. I live 2 houses down. My mom says you're the guy who used to walk with the red-haired lady." Ethan felt a familiar tightness in his chest. "That was my wife, Grace. She was nice. She gave me candy on Halloween and told my mom I looked like a young Paul Newman. I don't know who that is, but she said it was a good thing." Ethan smiled faintly. "It is." Lucas seemed to weigh something for a moment, then said, "You need help digging?" Ethan blinked. "You want to help me?" Lucas shrugged. "Beats math homework." And just like that, they dug together in the snow. No grand gestures, no profound conversation, just a boy and a man clearing frozen dirt in the dead of winter. Over the next few weeks, Lucas kept showing up, sometimes with his dog, Max, sometimes with 2 mismatched gloves and a backpack full of snacks. Ethan learned little. Things about him. Lucas's dad had been a Marine. Deployed overseas, never came back. He died when Lucas was 6. "I don't remember him much," Lucas said one day, while they were raking out dead leaves. "But I miss him like I do." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, I get that." Lucas didn't ask about Grace, and Ethan didn't talk about her. But somehow, they both seemed to understand that what they were building beneath the snow and silence was more than just a garden. It was a space between past and present, a quiet middle. One evening, after their work was done, they sat on the back steps eating peanut butter sandwiches. Lucas looked at the yard, then at Ethan. "You know, it's kind of weird, but this place feels like it's breathing again." Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked at the cleared beds, the old bird feeder Grace had once insisted on fixing each spring. He saw shadows of her in every corner, but they didn't hurt as much now. "Yeah," he said softly. "Maybe it is." The snow began to fall again, lighter this time. Lucas stood, brushed crumbs off his jacket, and waved goodnight. As Ethan watched the boy disappear into the quiet evening, something stirred in him, a fragile warmth, not joy, not yet, but hope. Part 3. Spring starts quietly. By March, the snow began to loosen its grip. It didn't melt all at once. Instead, it retreated slowly, patch by patch, as if reluctant to leave the land it had held for so long. Puddles formed in the garden beds, the earth underneath muddy and uncertain. But the ice was cracking, and that, Ethan thought, was enough. He stood on the porch with a cup of coffee, just one now, and watched a robin land on the bird feeder. The feeder had sat empty for most of the winter, but Lucas had insisted they refill it 2 weeks ago. "You gotta give them a reason to come back," the boy had said. Ethan had smiled at that, and now, as the bird pecked at the seeds, he realized How right Lucas was. Inside the house, Ethan had made some changes. He opened the curtains in Grace's reading room, dusted off the old record player. He even flipped through the cookbooks she used to mark with Post-its and notes like, "Too salty, add lemon," or Ethan's favorite. He tried baking once. Banana bread, the one she'd always teased him about never attempting. It came out burned and sunken in the middle, but Lucas ate 2 pieces without complaint. Better than cafeteria pizza, the boy shrugged. And that's a low bar. Ethan laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like years. Lucas kept visiting, even as school resumed and the days grew longer. Sometimes he'd just stop by to say hi, sometimes to help dig or rake. One Saturday morning, he brought his mother. She was a woman in her late 30s, hair tied back, eyes tired but kind. Her name was Heather. "I hope Lucas isn't bothering you too much," she said, smiling as she watched her son try, and fail, to hammer a crooked wooden marker into the soil. "Not at all," Ethan said. "He's been more helpful than he knows." Heather's eyes softened. "He doesn't open up to many people, not since my husband passed. He's different when he comes home from here, quieter but steadier." Ethan nodded, unsure how to respond. He felt the same about himself. Over the following weeks, Heather started stopping by with fresh bread or coffee from the cafe where she worked part-time. They didn't talk much at first, just short exchanges at the door or brief conversations in the garden. But there was something calming about her presence, familiar but not overwhelming. One evening, as they were planting the first daffodil bulbs, Heather asked him gently, "Do you ever talk about her?" Ethan paused. His hands were in the dirt, the bulb nestled in his palm like a memory too tender to squeeze. "Not much," he said. "Not yet." Heather nodded. "That's okay. Some days I still talk to James out loud, like he's just in the next room. Other days I forget the sound of his laugh and it breaks me." They sat in silence for a long while. The wind rustled the branches above them, new buds just starting to show. The earth smelled damp, full of things not yet seen, but waiting. "You ever wonder," Ethan said, "if we're allowed to feel okay again?" Heather looked at him with the gentle patience of someone who knew. It's not about permission, it's about remembering we're still here. That night, Ethan didn't return to his old routine of silence. Instead, he turned on one of Grace's old records. Nat King Cole's voice filled the room, rich and velvet. He lit a candle, not out of ritual, but because the soft glow felt right. He passed the piano on his way to bed, and for the first time since she'd gone, he sat down. His fingers hovered uncertainly over the keys, then pressed a chord. The sound was off, dust in the strings maybe, but it held. Another chord, then a melody, broken, halting, but familiar. Grace had once tried to teach him how to play her favorite, Lullaby. He never got it right. But now, under the weight of spring's return, he tried again. Outside, the wind carried the scent of thawing earth. The garden waited, so did life, and Ethan Miller quietly was learning how to live again. Part 4. The garden in Bloomit was May, when the zinnias came back, bright, unapologetic, and wild, just like Grace had planted them. Their colors shouted against the calm greens of the garden, coral, magenta, sun yellow. Ethan stood at the edge of the flower bed with a hose in hand, stunned by their sudden audacity. Lucas ran past him, chasing Max, who darted between flower rows with reckless joy. "You were right," Ethan said aloud, though no one was listening. They came back. Behind him, the house no longer felt like a museum. The walls had absorbed new laughter. The kitchen had hosted burnt pancakes and music on Sunday mornings. One night, Heather had even stayed late enough to help clean the dishes. It wasn't a date. Not really, just shared silence and small smiles. Still, Ethan found himself sleeping. A little easier after. Grace's things remained, but they no longer felt like ghosts. Her favorite books were stacked on a new shelf Lucas helped him build. The garden tools still bore her initials, but now they were used, not enshrined. On the anniversary of her passing, Ethan didn't visit the cemetery. He stayed home instead. He spent the morning kneeling in the dirt, planting seeds she'd ordered the year before. There was no ceremony, no speech, just the smell of earth and the feel of sun on his neck. That afternoon, he opened her final journal. He'd left it unread until now. The pages were full of thoughts, some whimsical, some heavy. There were sketches of garden plans and quotes from her favorite authors. On one page near the back she had written, "Grief is love with nowhere to go, but maybe if we give it roots, it becomes something else, something still ours, still beautiful." Ethan closed the journal and looked out at the garden. Lucas was watering the lavender now, methodically and proudly. Heather knelt beside the zinnias, pruning them with care. It was strange, Ethan thought, how loss could leave a crater, and yet slowly the edges softened. Life found its way in, not to fill the space, but to honor it. Later that evening, as dusk settled in, they all sat on the porch. Lucas leaned against Ethan's side, dozing. Max snored at their feet. Heather sipped tea, the glow of the setting sun painting gold into her hair. Ethan looked out over the garden. Birds chirped from the feeder. Fireflies blinked between the blooms. The wind carried the scent of lilac and soil, and something else. Something tender, something alive. "I used to think it would never stop hurting," Ethan said softly. Heather turned to him, not asking, just listening. "But maybe it's not about the pain going away," he continued. "Maybe it's about learning to live alongside it, like a scar or a song." Heather smiled gently. "You're doing more than learning, Ethan. You're growing." He looked back at the zinnias. He could almost hear Grace laughing, not with sadness, not as a ghost, but as a memory, a root, a bloom. He reached for Heather's hand, not grasping, just resting beside hers, and let the silence fall between them like petals. The garden, once empty, now swayed with life, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan Miller was not surviving, he was living.